Welcome to the lab. This is the Big Scientist channel where we explore the why so you know how. Today we are exploring the why behind crisp yet chewy, salty and savory soft pretzels. So if you want to know how to turn these simple ingredients into this salty, chewy, savory snack, stay tuned. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay up to date on all delicious science. Now let's get into it. So when you're making breads and doughs, the first thing you really want to do is bloom your yeast. And right here, I'm just adding my warm water and warm milk together. And you want to make sure your liquid is warm, whatever you're going to bloom your yeast in, whatever liquid it is, it's warm. As yeast react well to warm environments and sugary, sweet environments. So I'm also going to add my brown sugar to this mix and let it dissolve so the yeast have something to feed on. The reason why we want to bloom our yeast is not only to make sure it's alive and active, because if it's not alive and active, we're not going to get a good rise in our dough, and the dough is not going to really rise at all. So we're not going to get the bready texture that we want in our finished product if the yeast is dead. So first thing is you want to make sure yeast is alive by blooming it. And second thing, it actually gives you a good head start to your dough rising quicker and more efficiently. So I like to bloom my yeast whenever I'm making any kind of bread recipe. So here you can see I just added the brown sugar to my warm water and warm milk, and now we're going to add our yeast so that they can go ahead and start activating. And I like to let this mixture sit for about 5 to 10 minutes, and it'll get nice and foamy and bubbly, and that's when you know it's ready, and you know it's alive. If you don't see any foams or bubbles, then it's been sitting for quite a while, your liquid is either too hot, so you just want it warm to the touch. You want to be able to put your finger in it and it pretty much feel warm, not hot or scalding or anything like that, because you can kill your yeast if it's too hot. So just make sure it's warm. But if you don't see any bubbling, then either your yeast is expired and they're dead, or you killed them by having too much of it being too hot. So just go ahead and try again and get a new fresh yeast, and it should work once you give it a second try. But we're going to go ahead and set this aside. So here I have my flour and salt, and I'm just going to put it in my stand mixer bowl and just give it a good mix so that it's all incorporated, and then we can go ahead and add in our yeast mixture that we just bloomed. So as you can see here, the yeast mixture has bloomed a lot. You can see the nice thick foamy top, and that's how you know your yeast is alive. So we're going to go ahead and just pour it in, just drop it all in there. And we're also going to add in some melted butter at this time, and the melted butter will actually give this dough a nice, like, soft velvety kind of feel to it and taste. So I like to add in melted butter to my dough. And once you have your yeast mixture and your butter in there, we can go ahead and start mixing. And you want to just mix this dough, or knead this dough until it pulls away from the sides of the bowl and it's all incorporated. So this dough will come together really nicely, and it's not going to be too sticky, so you'll be able to see that as it progresses, how it's going to look. And this can be done by hand, but I prefer to use my stand mixer, but you can, like I said, you can do this by hand. Just don't add too much extra flour. I would encourage using some oil spray or some cooking spray oil instead of flour, just so you don't add too much and make the dough dry. I would like to take a moment to say, if you're loving the science content and you love learning the science behind your favorite baked goods and understanding the why, so you know how to create your own creations in the kitchen and just explore and create your own recipes, please go ahead and subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay up to date on all of our delicious science that we have baking up in the lab. We love to help everyone learn more about the science and knowledge of baking, so please go ahead and subscribe. As you can see, the dough has come and formed a nice solid dough ball. Like I said, it's not a very sticky dough, It's nice and soft and easily pliable dough. So it's pretty much clean the bowl, which is nice. And this is when you know it's pretty much almost ready to take out. And one good other test to check is once you touch the dough, if your finger comes back and nothing sticks to it, then you know you're good to go. So here my finger comes off clean, so I know my dough is ready. So I'm going to go ahead and take this out of the bowl, and we're going to shape it and move on to our next step. So I'm just spraying like my work surface with some cooking spray and my hands. Like I said, you don't want to add any more flour to your dough when you're working it because you don't want to dry out your dough. You don't want your dough to get dry and tough. So I like to use oil instead. And I'm just going to shape it into a ball so that we can get it in the get it rising. I like to get it in just one nice little ball and spray down the bowl so that as it rises it doesn't stick. So we're going to let this rise for about an hour to 2 hours, just depending on how warm your kitchen is. And you want this to double in size. So it's been about an hour and a half to 2 hours, and my dough has definitely risen in size. It's pretty much doubled, if not almost tripled in size. So we know it's ready. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn it out onto this greased workspace. So I'm going to go ahead and spray it down with some cooking spray again, so it's nice and greased so nothing sticks. And I myself like all of my baked goods and pretzels to be around the same size. So I like to weigh my dough and then kind of cut it up depending on how many I want to make in equal parts. So my dough is about 510, 511 grams. So I'm going to cut this up into about 64-ish grams each and make about 8 pretzels. Now that I have all my dough balls formed, we can go ahead and start shaping the pretzels. So to shape a pretzel, I just take the ball and I flatten it a little bit and form into kind of a log. And you want to apply even pressure across the entire roll as you're rolling out with your hands. And you want to make sure you're going at the same time with both hands because you don't want to twist the dough or else you'll create breaks or just tears in your dough. So I just continually reset and just go from the middle out. Roll from the middle and push your hands out. And just make sure you're uniformly doing this across the dough. And as you can see, it does take a minute to kind of get it down, but once you get it down, it's pretty easy. I like my pretzels to be a little bit bigger in size, so I shoot for about 22 to 24 inches long, and I do have a measuring kind of guide on the bottom of my dough mat, but you don't have to be exact. It's just pretty much your preference on how big of a shape, how big of a pretzel you want, because they will puff. Remember, they will puff up in the oven. So if you make them really small, they're not gonna have the holes, the spacing. They'll pretty much just be like little twisted dough, which is fine. It's just your preference. So make it as long of a rope as you want. Just don't make it too thin where it's gonna break when you try to manipulate it. So if you guys notice, as I'm rolling out this piece of dough, it keeps kind of springing back and getting shrinking in every time I let go of it. And this is because the dough the yeast in the dough is still actively creating air bubbles, or no, sorry, not air bubbles, carbon dioxide. And as such, as you kind of release the air pockets in the dough while you're shaping it and forming it and rolling it out, you're smushing the air pockets. And as you're doing this, instead of them staying smushed so that the dough stays the length you want, the yeast is actively creating more carbon dioxide, so it's filling up the air sockets and shrinking it up. So in order to combat that, what you can do is you can let your dough rest for a few more minutes, and this is just because the yeast is still active, like I said. So if you let it rest a little bit longer, the yeast will kind of slow down their production, and you can shape your dough without so much shrinkage. It'll still shrink a little bit, as you can see here, but not as much. And so now I can shape my pretzel, and it's pretty much the shape I want. It did shrink a little bit, as you can see. It is still shrinking a little bit, but not nearly as much as it was before. So that means our yeast is slowed down, and you want to make sure it's slowed down and not completely stop. You don't want to let your dough sit so long that it doesn't recoil at all, because then that means it's overproofed and it's going to be not the texture you want at the end. So I'm just going to roll out a few of these, and then we'll move on to the next part, which is our science, our pretzel science. So what makes pretzels so unique and special is the science behind them. So pretzels are typically dipped in a lye solution, which is it's a sodium hydroxide solution. And sodium hydroxide is a very strong alkaline, which is just means it's high on the pH scale. So neutral pH is 7, and anything higher than that would be considered alkaline or basic. And lye solution is actually around 14, which is very highly corrosive and highly hazardous. So if you're not familiar with it or you're scared to use it, please stay away. Most professional bakers will use it when making pretzels, but it is, like I said, it's very corrosive, and if you're not taking the right precautions, you can burn yourself. So at home, we can generally use baking soda, which is sodium bicarbonate. Now, baking soda has a pH of around 8 and 9, so it is alkaline. It's just much less corrosive than lye. So it's something that can easily be found and we can use at home. Now, the reason why alkaline solution in general is used when making pretzels is because of something called the Maillard reaction. Now, the Maillard reaction is a chemical reaction that occurs when the amino acids or proteins and sugars or starches in your dough react, or they break down and they react together to create new molecules and flavors. And these molecules create flavors, and they also contribute to the browning of the baked good. And this gives it the pretzels their distinct pretzely flavor and smell and color. And this reaction, the Maillard reaction, happens at high temperatures, high heat. So think baking or frying. As such, this lye solution that we're using, the alkaline solution, is actually giving us a head start on our Maillard reaction. So what's happening here is the alkaline is actually breaking down, denaturing the proteins. So it's breaking it down to our amino acids, and they're breaking down. And then the starches, or our sugars in the dough, are also breaking down. And this breakdown of the proteins and the sugars allows them to interact with each other when they get into the hot temperature of the oven. When they interact, they're going to form these new molecules that are going to create the new flavors and really give the browning to the outside of the pretzel, that nice brown crust. And this, like I said, this is all created inside the oven under the Maillard reaction. And now the Maillard reaction, the temperature range, like I said, it happens at high temperatures, and it usually starts from the low end at 284 degrees Fahrenheit or 104 degrees Celsius and just goes up from there. So that's how we're going to get our nice pretzel crust. And what you want to do is when you make your lye solution, or sorry, not your lye solution, your baking soda solution, you're going to dip your pretzels in. It's just warm water and baking soda. You're going to dip your pretzels in for about 10, 15, 20 seconds. You don't want to leave them too long, because if they absorb too much of the baking soda solution, they're going to start to taste like baking soda, and we don't want that. So just dip them and cover them with some water so that they can get that solution on, so they can start denaturing the proteins and breaking down the sugars, so we can get that delicious reaction in that oven. And so now that I've removed all of my pretzels, I know they look a little wrinkly and funky, but do not be alarmed. This is okay. This is, like I said, the denaturing process that's happening. And it's gonna be perfect once it starts baking. They're gonna puff up and be delicious. So what you want to do to encourage more browning, so we get that nice shiny glossy kind of color to our pretzels, is add in a egg wash. So this is just one egg scrambled with a little bit, probably about a teaspoon or so of water, just to give it a little bit more viscosity, so we can spread it. And this, again, will give it a little more color. It'll make it a little shiny. If you don't add the egg wash, your topping, first off, will have a hard time sticking, but it'll still brown because we did dip it in the alkaline solution, but it just won't be as shiny and as brown as it could be, especially since we're using just baking soda and not an actual lye. That will give it a really dark color. So I like to add my egg wash, and then I go in and add in salt. I like putting salt on top of my pretzels, but you can add any topping you want at this point. If you're using powdered sugar, I would suggest doing that when it comes out of the oven. Otherwise, it's going to be melted all over your pretzel. So yeah, so just add your topping on top, and then we're gonna go ahead and stick them in a really hot oven. We're gonna make sure your oven's preheated to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're gonna pop these in for about 10 minutes. So you can rotate these halfway through the bake, just to make sure they get even browning, but either way they're gonna come out delicious. So you can rotate them if you want. I did, because I did see that some of them were not browning as much as others, so that just means your oven has some hot spots. So here it is, the final result. Delicious, nice and shiny and brown, chewy and salty, savory, soft pretzels. Please make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay up to date on all delicious science. And please leave us a comment below telling us how you like to eat your pretzels. Have you made pretzels before? Have you used the lye solution? Have you used baking soda solution? What do you think about the Maillard reaction? And until next time, happy baking.